Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with some DraftKings Week 8 cash game plays for you. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint slide. This way you guys can see what I'm talking about while I mention some of the guys that we're looking at this week. Just give me 1 second here and I'll call it up. Okay, there's going to be 5 guys who we're going to be targeting for cash game play this week. Those 5 guys are Todd Gurley again at 6,300. Pairing him up with the Rams defense at 3,200. Looking at Phillip Rivers at 6,600 and his teammate Ladarius Green at 3,000. And we're also big on Jeffery this week. Todd Gurley is favored and at home. He's seen 74 touches in the last 3 weeks, 3 straight games of 128 yards or more rushing, and he's averaged 163 total yards. I mean, this guy is basically the St. Louis Rams offense at this point. They're giving him anywhere between 19 and 29 carries a game, basically just riding him, content to just keep the ball on the ground, move the ball with him running. He actually has about 6 runs already of 20 or more yards so far this season, which is a huge number for a guy who's basically only been a starter for 3 games at this point. He's put up at least 19 fantasy points in every game that he's played, and he's averaging over 25 so far this season. So even though his price jumped up a little bit to 6,300, we still think this is a really good spot for Gurley, and we'll be looking to roll him out again as well. Gurley and the Rams D is a very good correlation play this week. The Rams D is favored and at home in a game with a total of under 40 points. San Francisco's offense is not very good, and they have allowed the 10th most points to opposing defenses so far this year. In 6 games so far this year, this Rams D has amassed 23 sacks and 13 turnovers, which basically breaks down to about 4 sacks and 2 turnovers per game. They're a very tough team to throw on. 3rd lowest points allowed to quarterbacks. I think there's 6th lowest points allowed to wide receivers so far this year. So if the Rams are able to get up at home and just keep feeding and pounding the run with Gurley, I think their defense is going to be in a good spot to get some sacks and pick off some passes against Colin Kaepernick. And that's going to lead to a big Rams victory here. Remember, the Rams are favored by 8.5 in this game, and the total is only 39.5, which is one of the lower ones we've seen all season. So there's even a chance that they could keep the score pretty low and get some bonus points that way. Guy who's going to be the quarterback that we're looking at this week is Phillip Rivers. Baltimore allows the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks and wide receivers so far this season. The total of this game just creeped up over 50, so they're expecting it to turn into a shootout. And Rivers has been awesome lately. He's got 4 straight games of 333 yards or more and 2 or more touchdowns. He's thrown a total of 10 touchdowns in his last 4 games, so he's averaging about 2.5 touchdowns per game. He had 1 game where he threw for 500 yards, and every other game he's been in the mid to high 300s. So this is a guy that's just putting up some sick scores so far this year. He's averaging 29 fantasy points over his last 4 starts, averaging 24 fantasy points for the year. And this week he has the 2nd highest projection, but he's the 10th highest priced quarterback. So we like him a lot in cash because we think you're going to be getting a really good value at him. Rivers, based on what he's done in his last couple games, has a floor over 20 and a ceiling that's over 35. So at 6,600, you're definitely getting good value for rolling him out there. Next guy we want to talk about is Jeffery. Jeffries is back right now, and he's pretty much going overlooked. It seemed like he was pretty low owned last week, and I have a feeling he's not going to be incredibly highly owned this week either, going up against a pretty solid Minnesota secondary. When he's healthy, though, he's a top 10 wide receiver. He should be in the 7K range or more, probably around 7,600 with a lot of the other guys that are up there. You know, guys like the Keenan Allen, Brandon Marshalls. He's basically on that same level as them when he's right. He's only played 2 games so far this season, but he's seen 11 targets in both of those games. He's averaging 6.5 catches for over 112 yards a game, which right there would give you 20 fantasy points and basically make him a solid option to play. He has 1 touchdown in his 2 games so far this year. So if you add a touchdown to that 6.5 catch, 112-yard average, you're basically getting over 4 points per $1,000 of cost out of a guy like Jeffery, who is also a pretty safe guy to get, looks and come up with some catches and have a pretty safe floor for you, where he's not going to kill you in a cash game. He has the upside where he can go for, 30 points pretty easily. But even on a bad game, you're still probably going to get at least, 15 to 18 out of him, which isn't going to kill you at 6,400. The Bears should be trailing in this game, which means they should be throwing late. So you even have the opportunity to pick up some garbage time points with Jeffery as well. The last guy we're going to talk about for cash games is going to be Ladarius Green. If you look at the guys that we talked about here, they're all pretty reasonably priced. If you put them in your lineup, you're going to have enough money left over to go and spend up on some big studs You may need to put one more value type guy, maybe like a Steven Diggs or, a Lamar Miller if you're looking for a cheap running back into your rosters. But if you do that, you're going to be able to spend up $8,000 on the other two positions and go get whatever stud wide receiver or running back you want. And the key to that is really being able to use a guy like Ladarius Green at only $3,000. He would be an elite play again if Antonio Gates remains out with his MCL tear. $3,000 is just way too cheap to not use this guy, especially in cash games. He only needs about 15 to give you value in a tournament, probably around 10 to 12 to give you value in a cash game. His lowest fantasy score this year is 9.7, and he's averaging about 14 points per game. That means that his average is over what he would need to make value. And even on his low at 9.7, his floor is right around 10 points, which still isn't going to kill you for only $3,000. That's over 3 points per $1,000 of cost and would have you on pace for like a 160 score, which would be good enough to win a bunch of your 50-50s unless this turns into another huge week. San Diego should be looking to pass a lot versus a weak Baltimore secondary, and they're also expected to be trailing in this game, so you could see some garbage points. We saw what a guy like Danny Woodhead was able to do with some garbage time last week, and I think Ladarius Green is a guy who, is a pretty safe bet to get a couple catches, a couple yards, and have a good chance for a touchdown, which for only $3,000 is something that you can't really overlook. So that pretty much sums it up for the guys that we're looking at for cash games so far this week. Again, there could be some other guys that pop up on the radar depending on how things work out later on in the week with some of the injury news. But for now, we think if you have those 5 guys in your roster, it's a really solid start. You'll be able to put some studs in there around them, and you should be on your way to a pretty big score that'll help you cash in your 50-50s. So thank you for joining us here at RotoCurve for our DraftKings cash game plays for Week 8. And as always, stay classy, DFS.